We're on. All right, we're on, folks. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our Wednesday, December 6th, regular Board of County Commissioners meeting. So welcome, everybody. And let's see, Commissioner Richards is at another meeting on behalf of the county, so she's not here today. John, do we have any additions or deletions to today's agenda?
John Peacock.
Sorry, there are no additions or deletions to today's agenda.
Thank you. Now's an opportunity for anybody who wishes to make a public comment that is not on today's agenda. Anybody wishing to make a public comment not on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment and bring it back for commissioner comments. Steve?
Yes, tomorrow here in this room at the library, there will be an event called Home Fit for Seniors. And this is a repeat of the event that was held at the Basalt Library about a month ago. And it will be tomorrow from 11 to 2. They were taking reservations for lunch, and you could still call the senior center and possibly get a lunch. But if you don't RSVP, there might not be food during the lunchtime. But the program was a very good program. I would highly advise any seniors or any people who are caregivers for seniors, or if you have aging parents who are wanting to stay in their own home or anything like that, it's well worth attending. One thing that I learned that I never knew from the event in Basalt was that your smoke detectors in your home have only a 5-year life expectancy, and they need to be replaced. The smoke detector itself needs to be replaced periodically. And mine were about 30 years old, and I just replaced all of them. So that's my takeaway from what I learned. My house could have burned down. We could have died in a fire because the smoke detectors didn't work.
But it had new batteries in it.
No, the ones we had were hardwired. But now the new ones I have batteries and are hardwired both in case the power is out. So I feel much safer in my home because of having attended it. So I highly recommend it to anybody to attend that tomorrow, 11 to 2.
All right, thanks, Steve. Greg?
Yeah, hi. I'm just looking at the headline for today's newspaper. It says, SKICO feeds workers affected by slow start. I know we have a lot of workers in our community who are not making the income they expected due to the lack of snow. Thinking about the snowplow drivers and many others who are in the industry waiting for the snow and the tourists to arrive. I just wanted to put for discussion maybe in the future that perhaps some of our discretionary funds could go toward helping feed people who simply aren't making a go of it right now. This may become more critical if the drought continues, but it's something I'd like to bring up for discussion. Another thing regarding discretionary funds, Steve mentioned supporting West Springs Hospital to a greater extent this year in a recent conversation. I wanted to bring that back up and propose that we do that when the opportunity arises again. I've been spending a lot of time talking to the people at West Springs Hospital, Mindspring Health, and I think it's an existential crisis. If you look at the numbers of opioid addictions, suicide rate, methamphetamine and alcoholism and mental illness issues, I think now's the time we all get together and work on this. I'm devoting some energy toward it and hoping we can help raise the money they can get to finish the expansion of the hospital. That's it for me. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Patty, anything today?
Speaking of no snow, I can't tell you how comforting it was to hear white noise, literally white noise coming off of Aspen Mountain when they started blowing snow again, 24 hours a day out there. So let's hope that we get, some Mother Nature here to help us. I'm leaving for Breckenridge tomorrow, so trust me, it will snow. So everybody do your snow dances and think about it.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to snow tomorrow, but
it's going to snow in Breckenridge probably.
She leaves. She rolls out of town.
Okay. With that, we'll move on to our regular agenda items. These are individual consideration items. They're first readings set for public hearings on December 20th. First is a resolution approving the fourth quarter budget supplemental requests.
Good afternoon. Connie Baker, Pitkin County Budget Director. Today we have the first reading for a resolution to appropriate the fourth quarter budget supplemental requests for Pekin County. These requests were discussed at your work session on November 30th, so most of them you should be familiar with. But we have had one late addition, and a copy of that has been passed out to you. We have added in an additional amount for Ute Rockfall Mitigation. It's on page 2 of your packet under land management. And we have GR here to talk about this increase. Right after the third quarter supplemental request, we came to the board with a supplemental for this Ute Rockfall. We had estimated a dollar amount, but then as bids went out, we realized that was not going to cover the cost. So we are asking today for an additional $89,000 for the Ute Rockfall mitigation. And so I'd like to go ahead and have GR.
We have any silver in that rock? That's a huge change.
It is. And I'm GR Fielding. I'm the county engineer. And I've been working on the Ute Rock project just about every day since we asked for the first budget supplemental. And in all honesty, our guests on the first go-around would pay for the labor and the equipment time to go into reducing the size of the rock, but would not get any of that equipment to the work site or afford additional protections because of the precarious position of this rock. And as such, and we've worked with the contractor, and we're coming to final negotiations on the contract. This is the price that we're presented with to get this work executed.
So what does the mitigation entail that we're looking at right now?
Well, the mitigation entails several things. First is getting equipment and provisions to the area of Ute Rock. And to do so, this would include a helicopter lift of that equipment to the work site. Some of this equipment includes generators, compressors, hydraulic splitters, those sorts of things. Initially, we thought that we'd be able to drape the rock and have it exploded into smaller pieces. In reality, the contractor does not believe that that is the best way to move forward to protect which is below the rock. And so now what they'd like to do is do it with mechanical equipment, and they would put up protective barriers underneath the rock that look just like the rockfall fence. And so that gets attached to the area. Then they split this rock down, and they get it into workable, 1.5 to 2 foot size boulders. Then they haul it up a couple feet up the hill, and they will place the rock in areas where it's not in danger of falling down the mountain. The ridge where Ute Rock is above several homes off of Ute Avenue, and so we've also been working with those homeowners on the project as well. One of the major increases to our first guess at what the cost was, though, really does come down to being able to get a helicopter in that is large enough to lift the equipment from a staging area up to Ute Rock. We did take a look at what it would take to take Steve Child's recommendation of getting a helicopter and lifting the rock out of there. That helicopter would have to come out of Montana, and that was even more cost prohibitive than what we're looking at doing now.
So our original estimate really included more of a traditional scaling of the rock. without hauling the types of equipment we're now talking about using, as well as the safety measures and barriers, as well as the cost of relocating the rock is really what caused this estimate to go up.
Have you had any discussions with CDOT, because they have a lot of experience, certainly in Glenwood Canyon, in terms of dealing with rock removals? And
It's a great question, George. In fact, we use the same rockfall geologist as they used in the canyon, and we're using one of the contractors that they used in the canyon recently.
okay.
And on top of that, we may be borrowing some temporary rockfall protections from CDOT to execute the work as well.
Patty?
So are we still looking at possibility of doing it this before winter? Well, before whenever winter gets there?
I still have a few dominoes that have to fall, but so long as
Rocks
that
have to fall.
no rocks, hopefully. But so long as we keep progressing, how I hope that we do, then the contractor would like to get the equipment airlifted in on the 15th.
Okay.
Greg?
I'm just wondering what the insurance consequences are now that we're bringing in a heavy lift helicopter. Do we have to up our insurance, or is there anything we should be concerned about?
Honestly, to get the equipment lifted in is something that they do pretty frequently, and that's what they had to do in Glenwood Canyon. On top of that, there are provisions that they make with a helicopter operator in where their flight path is. And so that's one of the dominoes that I'm waiting to fall right now, is to make sure that we have an acceptable landing zone for the helicopter that doesn't have homes or other infrastructure within so many feet, and then that they'll be able to pick this equipment and fly up there fairly unimpeded over residents.
Right.
And we also include provisions where the contractors are required to carry certain levels of insurance and such, for instance, so that risk is transferred to the contractor.
Thank you.
So the alternative would be?
Dynamite. Well, we could go back. Certainly we can do that. We can go back and make our decision of what we want to have done there. We could put rockfall fence underneath Ute Rock. We've had the discussion of, one, what that would look like, two, of potentially hanging a feature underneath here. We could do nothing and sign. We are planning on having the area signed as well as doing this, but or we could try to postpone that work until next construction season when that melts out. But I'll tell you that speaking in this in geological time, when the rockfall expert tells me that you've got 5, 10 years, let's call it 5. That's not a lot of time. That doesn't mean it's going to fall in 5 years or 10 years. It just means that it's pretty precarious. So I still feel pretty strongly that I would urge the board that we need to do something.
Greg?
I was just going to say, when the first estimate came in, it seemed kind of low to me. It didn't seem like that number was adequate. I didn't say anything about it, but it makes sense now. I can imagine that it would cost more, so that I'm not having a lot of trouble swallowing this one.
Yeah, I mean, that first estimate did not include having a chopper come in.
Right.
Yeah, we had a lot of things that weren't included, George.
Right.
Well, we wouldn't know what
It was really just the kind of the traditional scaling of the rock. Yeah.
Right. Patty?
Well, having walked over there, not up the trail because it's signed, there's some significant rocks, and the picture that Joe showed me of that rock that embedded itself into the tree trunk, it's definitely a life safety issue up there. So I think the sooner the better, because with winter coming, that could freeze and crack again, and we'd have all that rock coming down, and we don't want that to happen.
Steve?
Geologically speaking, even a dam holding back a reservoir is a temporary structure. And if this is a 5 to 10 year thing, that's like a 50-year flood or something in a floodplain. And I think, I think we need to take care of it now in the best way we can to protect for the public safety, and so people can start using the trail again because it's such a popular trail.
Okay, so
Second
sounds
motion?
like everyone's supportive of this, so we would need a motion to move the supplemental request forward.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Okay, GR, I don't want to see you back here.
Well, I'm going to be covering for I think it's agenda item 8. So,
I mean, with
but I'm not
your
asking for any
palms with
money.
your hands open. I meant to
That
say.
you know of yet, anyway, right? Thank you.
Keep
Thanks,
the rotor
Connie.
time down.
Okay, next is a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Pitkin County approving an intergovernmental agreement between Pitkin County, the Aspen School District, Aspen Valley Hospital, and the City of Aspen for the purchase of vital mental health services.
Good afternoon. I'm Nan Sundin, Human Services Director, here with Karen Kenneman, Public Health Director. And we're excited to bring to you first reading on mental health intergovernmental agreement with the City of Aspen, Aspen Valley Hospital, Aspen School District, and Pekin County for the purchase of vital mental health services. Just to give you a little bit of background, as you all know, mental health and substance abuse have long been our #1 health problem in Pekin County, as it is primarily in the state and nationally. And a year ago, the Public Health Improvement Plan started doing some work around the public health priorities, and mental health and substance abuse came to the top of the list again. And there were concerns raised in a nominal group that Public Health held about fragmentation of mental health services, concerns about cost of services, some concern about this being a party town, as we know, and mixed messages about using substances, lack of psychiatric care, and the lack of specialized treatment in the Roaring Fork Valley. And as a result of that meeting, Pekin County convened a group of local funders, foundations, the Aspen Community Foundation and the partners that I mentioned, as well as CMC and the Aspen Skiing Company, to talk about this concern about the concern about the fragmentation. And as you all know, in our Pekin County Community Survey, the lowest score that we had on the survey was the perception that the county is not doing anything about mental health. So all of that came into play, and we convened partners and threw out the idea of what if we used our collective funding to have a greater impact on the outcomes for mental health and substance abuse so that we could create a more comprehensive system of care. And we decided to meet and review that idea. We had several stakeholder meetings with a number of partners, and we looked at our collective funding, and as a reminder, some of us had contracts, some of us were giving charitable contributions, we were giving it out to different agencies, and in that we were creating more competition and sort of adding to the fragmentation of the services. We met, we brought Andrew Romanoff in, who talked at a kickoff meeting for a 2-day strategic planning retreat. We established a mental health charter, which is in your packet, that identified the goal of creating integrated, coordinated, high-quality system of mental health care. And just a reminder, when we talk about mental health, we're talking about substance abuse. It's sort of a catch-all phrase. In the strategic planning process, the biggest deliverable was to pool our money and to put out a collective request for proposals to the mental health community and to ask them to tell us how they would address the issues that we had identified. And also we asked them to tell us how they would reduce fragmentation, how they would increase collaboration, how they could demonstrate that they were bringing in other revenues, and how they propose that we strengthen our system of care. We also had meetings with all the mental health providers, the primary providers. We told them that we were moving toward this RFP process. We had been telling them that for several months as well. In the RFP process, we received 3 requests for proposals. A couple of agencies decided not to apply for their own reasons, and the committee, which as I have said and is in the packet here, is the school district, the city of Aspen, the Aspen Valley Hospital, the county, and Aspen Community Foundation and the Aspen Skiing Company. We continued to work together. We reviewed the RFPs, and we are very excited to have selected one RFP, which came in as a collaborative venture between Mountain Family Health and Mind Springs Health. And so what you have before you today is a resolution approving first reading of an intergovernmental agreement that identifies the county as a fiscal agent. It encourages all of us to pool our funds, which we've all agreed to. It calls for basically existing funding, so our partners are not providing any new dollars, but we are getting a new set of services, and the new set of services will be related to rapid response follow-up for crisis, case management and therapy. It will include integrated behavioral health at Mountain Family Health. So the trend in the future is to identify depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues at the doctor's office. And so Mountain Family Health will have 2 clinicians as well as 2 case managers. And then the third piece, which is also exciting, is to be able to put a mental health youth and family therapist in the Aspen schools, and to follow up by putting in some backup in the BOCC schools. And so the new piece of funding would be using the fund balance from the Healthy Community Fund, $105,000, to make up the total of $488,000. And the partners have all committed their amounts. And our goal, and we have a fairly complicated contractual agreement, because the way that we plan to make this work is that by having a contract instead of giving our traditional charitable contributions, we have the ability to set expectations, performance expectations, outcome expectations that we haven't really had in the past. And Karen's been negotiating the contractual obligations with Mind Springs and Mountain Family Health. So is there anything I forgot that you want to add?
No, Nan did a really great job, and I was just going to highlight a couple pieces so you know what we've been working on for the contractual piece, so you can kind of see that tail end of this. So as Nan mentioned, we're looking at some new positions and then enhancement of existing positions, and thinking about it in the buckets of community-based mental health team, which included what Nan referred to as the rapid response. It's a wraparound service for people that are more high risk in the community. That would be a new program to Pitkin County. And then also with that, so there's 2 FTE with that that program. There's also an advanced psychiatric nurse practitioner that would be serving the jail and doing medication management there. For the integrated care team within Mountain Family and Mine Springs, that integrated model that Nam mentioned, that truly is the way that primary care is going, and it's a great kind of stigma reduction type of program so that people feel comfortable. They go in to see their primary care physician, they do a brief screening and realize, wow, this person might be suffering from depression. They refer them right away to the mental health practitioner in that office. And so for folks that might have reticence to walk into a mental health clinic, it really does reduce that stigma, and it's just best practice, right, to look at the whole body and not just segment out one part of us. And then, so there's some FTE tied up in that in the BOCC clinic. And then, as Nam mentioned as well, we have a new position at Aspen School District, which will be really good to get someone in there, and then an enhancement of the BOCC clinicians or therapists. And so we're really looking at co-creating the metrics with Mine Springs and Mountain Family so that law enforcement, the school district, and the hospital feel like they all are getting what they need, and we'll put those metrics into the contract. And then public health will be kind of the convener of this group and the contract monitor to bring the folks together to make sure we're talking monthly and everybody's working out the kinks and getting what they need. And in essence, public health will be working with the partners, Mine Springs and Mountain Family, to ensure that the metrics are being met throughout the process. So I think this is an opportunity for us to just strengthen relationships that are already existing and partnerships that have already existed, but really just strengthen them up and to increase communication and feedback loops around communication so that everybody within the funders group as well as the provider feel like they're getting what they need to enhance what we know is, over and over, so many gaps in our system, and so many quality services that even with the quality services we have, people are just struggling out there with substance use disorder and mental health disorders. And so how can we help everyone in our community to thrive? And so this is one opportunity to look at that differently. And I think with the enhanced and new positions, that we're really allowing some more prevention work to happen so that people don't get into crisis. So the rapid response, this wraparound program, the therapists in the schools, hopefully will mitigate some folks ending up in the ER or ending up in law enforcement. And so we're hoping that actually, with this new system, that we're reducing the impact to law enforcement and ER and crisis in those situations. And so their funding's getting kind of upstream pushed.
Did you have your hand up? No. Who will be doing the hiring and be responsible for the supervising of the new all these new FTEs?
So that would be Mine Springs and Mountain Family would be doing the hiring, pending what position.
So they will all be employees of either Mine Springs or Mountain Family?
Right. So we'll be using the agencies that have the experience and expertise, and they'll be doing the hiring. We'll be doing the contract management and the performance management, and making sure that they're meeting the expectation of the county as well as our other partners.
Okay, Patty?
Yeah, I think this is a great idea, and it's something that we've been talking about and really trying to address for quite a while now. My concern being the Healthy Community Fund, which is coming up for reauthorization. We bring this up every day because it's hitting us every day, that we don't have that funding in the future. We need this fund refunded. Mm-hmm. And besides that, we're also using this fund right now to do our new public health department. So it's critical because it could be in a year or two that we no longer have funding, and and that's tragic in my mind. But it's also a reality, and I think we need to keep that in mind. And I think the public needs to know that we're using the funds that we have available to us now that we would like to continue to have available to us in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Patty.
Greg, then Steve.
I just want to thank you so far. This is extremely exciting. This is if people haven't been paying attention when they learn of the changes you're making and the positive steps you're taking, I think this is like a moonshot for us in what is really a crisis here. So thank you for your work on it. I had one question regarding, I know the other reasons we don't have to get into why other entities did not participate in the RFP, but I know those entities exist in the community and they're still doing good work. And I just want to know, do we have a strategy for working with the other organization, whether it's at Hope Center or Way Out or others who I know who have maybe different models for how they help solve this problem? Do we have an integrated way of including them still, even though we've chosen to go with Mine Springs and Mountain Family?
Yeah, our hope is they are both valuable organizations, highly valued in the community. And I think we all sort of experience this as RFP 101, and that as we move forward with the availability of funding, that we could actually get better and identify more niches and make it a program of attraction for the other agencies that are providing valuable services that are clear and fit into the niche of what we want to purchase. So Karen's going to be working, you want to talk about the work that we plan on including everyone, and we plan on being, and we have been very transparent all the way around, and we're hoping everyone will be involved as we move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So didn't get a chance to talk about this at the Board of Health yesterday, but have brought up before the mental health system coordinator position, and we actually were able to start to work with Aspen Community Foundation and Aspen Strong to look at a community partnership around that work. Instead of bringing someone in-house and doing an RFP, we had some collaborative conversations with both agencies and really thought, wow, here's an opportunity to have the mental health system coordination work living in community and in community-based organizations where it best fits. And so we're partnering with Aspen Community Foundation and Aspen Strong to really have a collaborative group convening of all the partners around mental health and substance use. It's currently the existing Valley Marijuana Council, but they're looking to expand out a little bit past marijuana to mental health because we know it's all tied together. And they have the existing partners already at the table. So instead of creating a new group and new bureaucracy with a new group, having that land in an existing group with the foundation we felt like was really good. And Aspen Strong is going to bring their relationship to the mental health world to that group now and really bring that expertise around resource connection and connection to providers, because that's what they do best, and some media, which is also something that they're really strong with. And so we're working with them through another funding source, our HICPA funding source, to have those dollars go to that group and buoy up their efforts, and in hopes that because we had a limited amount of funding, it expires in 6 months, that Aspen Community Foundation could just keep that work living regardless of the funding, and they're invested and engaged in that work, and they have some wonderful facilitation skills to really make that collaborative work well. So super excited about that, and I think that allows for some of the synergy that Nan's talking about in the future of how do we even look at the bigger continuum of care system and really look at all of the folks within that mental health system and start to have them have an opportunity to collaborate and work together. And again, they already have existing partnerships, but how do we start to enhance those even further?
Steve?
It's really important to know this is just the beginning, and with mental health and substance use being our number one health problems, we anticipate that as we grow and learn together, we're going to find more gaps and more opportunities, and we're going to find more revenues together. And the key is that by working collaboratively, we have greater ability to access other revenues. So that is the part that's super exciting.
Steve?
When we were doing the grant, looking at the grant applications, there were maybe about five different organizations that were all, their grants from the previous year were all lumped together, and as I recall, it was around 173,000 or something.
Right.
To that effect. So that, I presume, is the core of the money that will go
Right.
to this, just to the two organizations to fund
Exactly.
on this. And so
That
then
and
the
the
other
fund
ones that
balance.
didn't apply or didn't get accepted won't get anything from our Healthy Community Fund.
That's correct.
At least this year.
Right.
Is that
Or-
correct?
Right. All the partners have agreed that they're ending contracts or agreements. So that's correct. And so it'll be that core money that Healthy Community Fund gave in 2017 plus the fund balance of $105,000, which is not the total fund balance, but it's a big chunk of the fund balance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel bad for the
Yes.
organizations that aren't getting funding from us. Hopefully they'll be able to stay, keep on their mission and be able to do what they see as their mission. But I'm excited about this because I think it's being more, we're focusing our money we were putting into mental health services into a concerted effort, which was what the goal of it was, to try to really have a major impact by
Right.
focusing what we're doing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me is when I looked at your memo, we all know we've got some tremendous resources in our community. And as your memo states, all the human service agencies throughout the county, they spend about $9 million annually addressing mental health
and substance
issues,
abuse, yeah.
which is unbelievable when you think
Right.
about that for a small county, right?
Right.
And so, and up to now, what I'm hearing you say is the outcomes to date really not fulfilled the needs that we're seeing. And so this is really a new model to look at utilizing a different way with specific outcomes that are measurable and we can actually quantify. So
Right.
I think that's important. It's exciting, and I certainly hope that this will help, because there's a tremendous amount of dollars that have been going out through all these agencies who are all doing great work. But it seems like there's still a need in terms of trying to really cut to the chase and get to the core problem. So I think it's a good strategy. It should be noted that the funding and this contract is only good for, the commitment is only good for 2018. And so I would suspect maybe late summer, we'll have some sort of idea in terms of results that we can go back to our partners and show successes. And as Patty says, noted that that will be about the time that we'll be drafting our ballot initiative to ensure that the Health Community Fund continues to be a successful, viable initiative to help continue these programs.
Yes, absolutely. And the way that the intergovernmental agreement reads is that it's for 1 year and can be renewed, which is our hope. It will be renewed. And right, by next summer, we'll have a sense of what the needs are, if we're going to do a second RFP, if we're going to wait, what happens next. And I think that, George, I appreciate what you're saying. I think what's exciting is we use this model for the detox, right? There was a crisis, it wasn't working. We went out to RFP, we got a new vendor. Collectively, our dollars made a much bigger difference with the provider. And so our hope is the same with mental health. And we hope to be a partner in making a meaningful difference in mental health outcomes in our community.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks.
I
So,
would like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve on first reading, set for second reading, public hearing on December the 20th, a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners approving an intergovernmental agreement with many organizations in the community for purchase of vital mental health services.
Second that.
any further discussion?
Thanks, you guys.
All in favor say aye.
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 All right. We'll see you back in a couple
Well
of weeks.
done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our partners for coming, Michelle
And I know
from
the
the
community is going to
hospital.
appreciate this effort
Mitzi.
greatly.
I'm staying because I think
I
you
don't
want
know
me
anymore.
again.
You're still here.
Okay, next is a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between Pitkin County and the Board of County Commissioners of Garfield County
Oh, Garfield.
for the provision of child support services.
Right? Okay, so child support services are services that work to assure that children receive financial and medical support from each parent. It's a statutory obligation, and we've been contracting with Garfield County for, I think, over 30 years. And 5 years ago, you gave me permission to sign the annual agreement for 5 years. So here we are again, 5 years later. And basically, this is an opportunity where Garfield County locates each parent, they establish paternity and support obligations, and then they enforce those obligations and they collect the revenues for the children and families. What I can tell you is when I came 5 years ago, the annual amount that Garfield was recovering was over $300,000, and now it's up to $700,000. So this is a vital service for vulnerable families and children. It's super affordable and efficient. We only pay about $15,000 for this, and we pay them through a small amount from our administration grant. And then we get what the state calls incentives when we collect a certain amount of money, and we give that to Garfield County. And so this resolution is basically asking you to give the Human Services Director the ability to sign in perpetuity as long as the county manager agrees and there's funding available. So because it's such a standard part of our daily and annual work that it just makes it easier if that works. And I think that Garfield has an intergovernmental agreement, and we created an intergovernmental agreement. So what you see in your packet is a plan as well as a new Pekin County intergovernmental agreement to sign to approve that plan.
Patty?
And then, as we've done in the past, if there's any issues that come up, you'll bring it back to us at any time.
Yes,
that you
and
need to.
I generally bring child support services to the Board of Social Services meetings once a year at least, and I bring
keep us-
Joy in to talk to you about what they're seeing and if there are any barriers. There are constant changes in child support services. In fact, the name used to be Child Support Enforcement, and you can see I'm still tripping over it. Child Support Services, and so yeah. But annually, through the Board of Social Services, we'll do an update,
So we just are kept in the loop if need
so
be.
you know what's happening in that program.
Makes sense.
Any other questions?
Make a motion to approve resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between Pekin County and the Board of County Commissioners of Garfield County for the provision of child support services.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Nan.
Thank
Nan.
you.
Amen.
Okay, next we have a couple of access easements. The first is an ordinance accepting an access easement from the City of Aspen in connection with the Picken County Center subdivision project.
Good afternoon. Richard Neely, Assistant County Attorney. As George just stated, this is an ordinance accepting an access easement from the City of Aspen for, in connection with the Picken County Subdivision Center project and the Picken County Administration and Public Safety Building, which is currently under construction right over here. I'm not sure exactly what we're officially calling it yet, but I believe it's the Picken County Administration Building.
And Cheryl,
We changed it to Picking County Administration and Sheriff's Office.
Excellent.
We'll see how it ends up.
Well, anyway, last year, this board entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Aspen, in essence agreeing to cooperate in certain areas in connection with the new Picken County building and the City of Aspen facility that's under construction simultaneously. This particular easement grants the county an easement that allows the Pitkin County Sheriff officers to utilize the Aspen Police Department garage to access the jail facilities and the lower level of the sheriff's building, or the sheriff facilities in the new building, when it's necessary and practical to do so. In the event of weather or blockage, things like that. So, or if they need to transport an inmate and they can't use the sheriff's garage or something like that. So that's what this one does. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Patty?
I just know in history with this whole center up here, that we've had multiple issues with easements and ownership of little strips of land anywhere. So I appreciate our efforts to clean this up, and I know we have more to clean up today, but I won't be surprised if in the future we're coming back to, because we found something new. Because we thought we had it all cleaned up before. So I think it's a good thing, and this, we do need to have this access established. I think it's important to our new building.
Any other questions?
I will make a motion to approve an ordinance accepting access easement from the City of Aspen in connection with the Pitkin County Center subdivision project.
Second.
Any further discussion? Steve?
I guess it's a further question. Does this allow our sheriff's vehicles to go through their parking garage and for them to come through our parking garage? Does it cover both of those bases?
This particular easement does not. What we will be seeing in the next ordinance is an access easement that you would be granting to the Aspen Police Department vehicles to use actually not our garage, but a portion of the property on the west side of the newly constructed building.
It's more in the driveway area where that drive-through place would be.
That is correct. Mm-hmm. And I can point that out on the next.
I remember that. It was outside the parking garage area.
Right, there's that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we still have in the works operations agreement for that will hammer some of the additional details out. But these easements were called for in the intergovernmental agreement, and the city and I have been working to get them finished up. So.
Okay.
So we're just moving forward a process we already started. This is just cleaning up that.
Essentially, I mean, of course, you could always decide not to grant the easement.
I think we need to have those.
All right, so we have a motion, a second. If there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 So following up, we have yet another ordinance granting certain easements to the City of Aspen in connection with the Pitkin County Center subdivision project.
Okay, Richard Neely, Assistant County Attorney again. This one is, again, for the Pekin County Center subdivision project. This is a grant of 3 easements from Pekin County to the City of Aspen. The easements at issue here are an access and utility easement, a storm sewer easement, and a lot line easement. The easements cover various things. The access easement, as we were discussing before, allows the Aspen Police Department vehicles to access an area on the northwest side of the building, so right over on this side over here. That easement area is depicted as an attachment to the access and utility easement if you are interested in taking a look at it. The storm sewer easement will serve as stormwater drainage for both the City of Aspen building and for the Pekin County building as well. So that is kind of a dual benefit in that one, and that will be tied into the city's storm drainage system. The lot line easement will cover construction of false fronts between the buildings, and it also allows for a slight encroachment from the City of Aspen building. One of the walls they poured is a couple inches onto the county property as well, so it covers that. It kind of cleans that up a little bit.
Okay, questions? Steve?
Not a question, but I would move to approve this ordinance accepting an IGA with the City of Aspen for these easements.
Second.
It's not really an IGA, is it?
It's an access easement, not an IGA.
That's correct, Steve. The
Yeah.
IGA was previously approved. This is the ordinance granting certain easements to the city of Aspen in connection with the Pekin County Center subdivision project.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second, yeah.
Second, Greg. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you on that
you.
one. Okay, sort of a lengthy worded one. Next is an ordinance adopting an amendment to the Pitkin County Land Use Code concerning areas and activities of state interest and repeal Land Use Code sections 7-90 and 2-40-140, as well as amending Table 2-1 to include the Planning and Zoning Commission as a recommending body for as part of a two-step review. What does all that mean?
Wow.
Well,
Test to see how much you can read in one breath.
we did have a work session on this, but
We've had actually a couple of work sessions on it. The Planning and Zoning Commission has also had several meetings discussing it as a proposed amendment to the Land Use Code. The Planning and Zoning Commission has recommended approval, and the BOCC has had a couple of opportunities to hear the fundamental structure of the proposed code amendment. Briefly, George, what this lengthy title and lengthy code amendment is set for today is a first reading, an acceptance by the BOCC, and then to set the matter over for a public hearing and ultimate adoption. The proposed code language would be incorporated within the Land Use Code as a new chapter, Chapter 12. The purpose of the code amendment is to re-energize and invigorate the county's 1041 regulations. The 1041 regulations, well, 1041 is a euphemism of sorts. It refers to a piece of state legislation that was done way back in 1974, House Bill 1041. And what the House Bill 1041 did was to adopt a regulation identifying certain activities and certain areas that are of statewide interest. Primarily, these are areas and activities that would either be sensitive to development or would present potential impacts that might impact sensitive areas as a consequence of that development. So the state, in identifying these areas and activities, was encouraging local jurisdictions, municipalities and counties to adopt regulations to address development that fell within that definition, and to codify a methodology of review such that the impact associated with that development would be mitigated. So the county did that. Of course, actually Pitkin County was ahead of the curve a bit. Our 1041 regulations were adopted actually prior to the actual House Bill 1041's adoption. Over the years, though, particularly in the last decade and a half, the county has moved away from the 1041 regulatory scheme recognized in state law in Title 24 to rely more heavily on development regulatory authority found in Title 29 and Title 30. The location of that authority isn't so much important, but what the county has done was to deal with development in sensitive areas with not so much a construct to identify mitigation, but to actually move towards prohibition. And that emphasis works to a point. However, what we've found over time is that we've lost, through the vigorousness of the 1041 review process, the ability to review larger projects that were initiated by governmental entities or taxing districts that were present in the county, as well as projects that ultimately would be approved even in spite of our prohibition language in the land use code, and would be moving towards a approval to remediate any potential takings without a more defined review and quantification or qualification of potential mitigation measures that the board could rely upon. So what we've got is a regulation that mirrors closely, if not completely, in fact it does completely comply with the 1041, the original 1041 Act. It establishes a rather strict regime for identifying impacts and then mitigation of those impacts prior to a development permit being issued. And it will allow the county to pay attention to things of greater extent and potential impact. The impetus for this regulation's establishment was a recognition that the county's land use code was really wholly inadequate to review water projects, for example. Water projects like the Independence Pass project or the Frying Pan, Arkansas project that are trans-mountain diversions of water resources to the Front Range. And we really didn't have a methodology in our land use code to review that type of activity adequately, or actually, you know, many other potential development activities by governmental entities. So, what we are recommending, along with the P&Z, is that the board accept this regulation on first reading, and as I said, set it over for a public hearing, further discussion, and ultimate adoption. I would point out a couple of interesting aspects of the proposed regulation, in that it does enhance the identification of impacts and the methodology for mitigation of those impacts. It also provides for a way out. If the review process indicates that there really isn't a significant impact by a project that would otherwise be captured by the regulation, then we can make that finding, and the developing entity or governmental entity that's involved with that type of a project can get a pass. And we refer to it in the regulation as a FONSI, which mirrors the regulations found in the National Environmental Protection Act for convenience and recognition. I would also point out that certain projects are exempt from these regulations. Number one, it's recommended that all county projects are exempt from the regulation, as well as certain projects of the City of Aspen. The City of Aspen exemption is in recognition that the city, through its Public Works Department, provides a variety of services, and particularly municipal water services, to residents of the county that are not residents of the incorporated area of the City of Aspen. The extension of their municipal services goes way back and is found in areas east of town, up on Red Mountain, certain areas to the west, the ABC, for example. So this would allow the city to go in and do work and maintenance improvements and realignments such that are necessary to keep their system running without having to go through our review process. The exemption for the city recognizes that the work that would be done by the city does not significantly expand their service area or significantly expand the capacity of their ability to provide services outside of the incorporated area. So with that, I'll pass it to the board, answer any questions if there are any.
So it seems like what I got out of that is it basically first simplifies the process, certainly for governmental agencies, but it doesn't take away any of the protections in terms of looking at land use 1041 reviews.
No, it strongly enhances the ability to look at impacts from land use. Yeah. The application of the, I should also mention, of the regulation is limited. It's not every person who needs a development permit will be reviewed through these regulations. The applicability of the regulations is limited to governmental entities, taxing districts, entities such as that, or activities that are associated with the identified state statute activities of state interest. For example, municipal water projects, sanitary disposal projects, mass transportation projects, highway and road projects, airports, things of that impactive nature.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Steve?
John, in the AIS on the second page, it's talking about exemptions, and it said a decision must be made as to whether to exempt all other Pitkin County activities. And I see in the actual language under 12-2040 under exemptions, it says the regulations of this chapter 12 shall not be applicable to Pekin County.
Right.
So was that the question of whether to exempt all county things? Was that a discussion P&Z had?
It was a discussion that P&Z had, but also the BOCC at a work session. One of two, or maybe two of three work sessions on the issue. And so the proposed language that is carried forward reflects the BOCC's consideration during those work sessions. The idea of exemption for Picton County projects reflects that the BOCC is the final determiner of a development permit application brought under this regulatory chapter. And the BOCC for Picton County projects is also the proponent, or would also be the applicant of any development project. So the obvious awkwardness of the Board of County Commissioners being an applicant and also the regulatory authority is obvious, but it also reflects the fact that a project that is being brought forward and developed by the county, which is to say the Board of County Commissioners, is a project that is concerning assets, real property that the county owns, and that the process that the BOCC will undertake to determine the feasibility of a particular public project, whether it's airport reconstruction or a trail or a road expansion or something like that, is something that the BOCC will of itself, as a property owner and a project proponent, will develop with public participation, so that the BOCC, in deciding whether or not to move forward with a project, will have a public review and public feedback to consider as part of its initial decision. And it's not necessary to duplicate that and to incur additional expenses just to have the process repeated when the BOCC is in a regulatory review capacity.
And the reason I ask that, I know that members of the public are always saying the county should abide by its own rules just like everybody else is required to. We hear that so often on any sort of controversial proposed project.
Right. Well, and there's and that's actually a sentiment that's been reflected and heard by the county for the longest time, and why that exemption hasn't been there. But the practical reality of it is if the county was in a development, a profile and processing an application through a regulatory process, it would be looking for ways to accomplish it, as opposed to being more objective and circumspect. Should this happen at all? Versus does it meet the criteria of a regulatory scheme? So in all reality, the decision-making process for the county commissioners and whether or not to pursue a project is quite a bit more detailed, because that fundamental question, do we do something or do we not do it, has to be a question that's resolved by the BOCC in public with public input.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm good with that.
Any other questions?
I was going to ask that same question, but for me, it's kind of full circle, because I was part of this board when we changed the 1041s, and so I understand why we did it then, and I understand now why we're changing it back, because times have changed, things have changed. Issues, our ability to have oversight on specific issues, especially the healthy rivers and streams, is of great importance. But I think in any county project that the county was going to be the proponent for our own project, we take into consideration those things: rockfall, wildfire, setbacks. We had such a big discussion in setting the regulatory issues in our land use code that we understand it, and I think the public should be to trust us to make those decisions based on what we see and how we want this county to look. So I'm supportive of moving this forward. Finally.
Okay, Steve?
So I'd make a motion to approve the ordinance adopting an amendment to the Picken County Land Use Code concerning areas and activities of state interest and repeal Land Use Code Sections 7-990 and 2-40-140, as well as amending Table 2-1 to include the Planning and Zoning Commission as a recommending body as part of a two-step review.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Next is an ordinance granting an access and utility easement and water well easement to Melanie Griffith across the 87 Lode owned by Pitkin County.
Thank you, George. Richard Neely, Assistant County Attorney again. Hold on one moment here and I'll pull up a map of the location here. But
Read the news while we're here.
I love maps. Read the headlines.
And I believe we have a representative of Miss Griffith here. Who's, come on up. Kurt Sanders. And after I introduce this, I'll ask him to respond to any questions you have. All right, as George mentioned, this is an ordinance granting an access and utility easement as well as a well easement to Melanie Griffith across the 87 Lode owned by Pekin County. This is the 87 Lode, or at least a portion of it. The county owns a 25% interest in the 87 Lode along with Castle Creek Investments, CCI. In 1979, an easement was granted for a driveway across the 87 Lode, which is this driveway right here, although the easement does not cover the actual as-built location of the driveway. My understanding is that Miss Griffith is intending to sell her property, and in connection with the due diligence period, either the title company or one of the attorneys of the purchaser discovered that in addition to the driveway not being located within the legally described easement, there was never actually an easement obtained from the county for the driveway itself. The same is true for a water well located on the 87 Lode that serves Miss Griffith's property. This is a request for the county to grant those easements, and my recommendation is that the board does that. Some additional information that can go with this as well is in 2000 and 2001, Pekin County worked with the owner of the majority owner of the 87 Lode, CCI, to remove some TDRs from this mining claim and some additional mining claims. In connection with that, Pitkin County, CCI paid Pitkin County $50,000 for the TDR off of the 87 Lode. I'm not sure if those TDRs ever landed anywhere, but the county has done some business and been involved with this parcel for at least the last 17 years. And I'm happy to answer any further questions that you may have about this.
So there's a part of this request is to right to maintain the existing water well on the 87 Lode. And the 87 Lode is the parcel that we have a quarter interest in?
That is correct.
So how did that happen?
As far as how is the well drilled on the property?
Right. I mean, if we own a 25% interest in that property, isn't that unusual that someone would just drill the well without having already having an easement or approval of the county to do that?
I would say that it is not wholly unusual. I think that in this area in particular, where we have a crisscross of mining claims, often overlying one another, that the location of a well a few hundred feet even onto one mining claim or another mining claim isn't wholly unusual. My understanding is that the wells are correctly permitted and the water right exists. In a general, more larger scale, in my year at the county, I found that the backside of Aspen Mountain has numerous easement issues and property boundary issues that are almost always in the process of being cleaned up. And I would call this somewhat of a cleanup, just because the driveway was built, the house was, Miss Griffith's property was approved for construction by the Community Development Department, which reminds me, I should have mentioned this before, I did check in with the director of the Community Development Department and with Public Works to see if they had any objection to this easement being granted, and there were no objections. So, but
Patty?
Yeah, it was my understanding many, many years ago when it came to our realization that we were part owners in this claim. The county did not have any knowledge of that prior to that. So chances are with CC, we do a lot of work we have in the past a lot of work with CCI on cleaning up claims on the backside. So I think that when there was an issue between the owner of CCI and the county, when we realized the county had ownership, the 0.25% ownership, and I think these easements and wells were already done at that time. So that's probably why the county was not involved in that process the first time around, because nobody knew that we were supposed to be contacted because we didn't know we had ownership. And that's not the first time it's happened to us with these mining claims. So I think we just need to, you're right, we need to clean this up and move it forward. And since we've heard no objections from the other owner of CCI, he's approved it, and with our own staff, I think we just need to move it forward.
And, you know, we've had a few of these where we've had a partial interest in mining claims. And it seems like really the cleanest way to do this is to have Castle Creek investors purchase our quarter interest of the mining claim and just clean that up that way. We've done that in the past. We've either purchased different shares of mining claims, or we sold them. And for me, that's really the cleanest way to do this. Is have CCI purchase that quarter share and come up with a value, and then we don't have to worry about any issues with water down the line or any other issues.
George, I think we tried to do that many years ago, and there just wasn't. We weren't able to negotiate with the CCI. It's my recollection of history.
I don't remember concerning this particular property, but
it's a long time ago.
You know, if the parties aren't willing to acquire or to buy somebody, you know, the other party out, then the fractured ownership persists. Many mining claims are held that way.
Right.
Oftentimes, our fractional interest is acquired through a tax sale, where one of the original, you know, fractional interest holders just stops paying property taxes. I don't know if CCI has any interest in buying us out or not. I know that for development purposes, the property doesn't present anything to them, so there's no. I'm not sure if there'd be any particular advantage to having it in their name. We're not a bad party to be co-tenants with, generally speaking, because we're not actively seeking to change the use of any property that we have an ownership interest in.
So what you're saying is, by us maintaining an interest in the property, we can help ensure that there's no other further development that exists?
GDRs have been transferred off.
The use of the property cannot be made by one co-tenant that is inconsistent with the ownership interest of another co-tenant. So if there is a development ability or a development right associated with the property, then both ownership or all ownership interests would have to agree to pursuing that particular type of development, or one party would have to buy another one out. I thought Rai mentioned that there was a TDR that was realized off the property, so the property is no longer developable. If it were, then there would probably be, you know, an incentive for a private party to buy us out. That not being the case with this one, you know, expending the money to buy out our interests doesn't really change what CCI can do with the property right now today.
All right.
And I would also note, and I wasn't very clear about that, the property has been sterilized for development, and in connection with that process, the county did receive $50,000 to reflect our partial ownership in the property. I'm not sure what TDR certificates were worth in 2000, 2001, but I know they're worth slightly more than $200,000 now. So I would say $50,000 is for a quarter ownership interest is about right for that.
All right. Steve.
Rai, was this the driveway into the house? Was that an original road that went into the mining claim from many years ago?
I don't know the answer to that, Steve. Kurt, do you know?
Yes. So if you look at the shape, I guess the razor blade shape of the 87 load, Little Annie's Road comes up from the left through Lime Creek subdivision, and Little Annie's is publicly dedicated. And then it reaches the 87 load property and makes that hairpin. So if you stay to the left, you'll continue up the backside of Aspen Mountain. If you come to the right, you're on Lower Hurricane Road, which then takes you on up to other properties beyond. So that is, to my knowledge, that is the historic road. It's always been there. And so, you know, the easement that we're talking about would be at the point where Little Annie Road comes onto the 87, that first slope down, and then up to the Griffith driveway, up to her property, which is that perfect square property there. So to answer your question, yes, that is the historic access along there, and so we're not seeking to deviate from that at all. I'd also point out that the well, if you notice, I don't know what the creek is that's coming down, but it's in blue, and it comes down at that intersection of Little Annie Road and Lower Hurricane. That's exactly where the well is, and my guess is the well is there for a reason, and that's, you know, where the drainage is coming down. So the well is not off on its own away from the road. The well is really in the road for all intents and purposes.
Looks like the Forest Service has a little tiny in-holding there.
Looks like it.
John or Rai, are we, is there any danger in terms of us setting any sort of precedent in terms of granting easements across county property?
No, we've done that event in the past, depending on the situation. It does not offend the covenant that was placed on the property when the TDR was pulled off, simply because it predates the covenant and the TDR. The transaction is similar to other transactions that we've done to facilitate utilization of property by a private party, and this is not out of the ordinary from that perspective.
Okay. Other questions?
George, that was a really good point, George. I just think the circumstances regarding this issue are different from other circumstances with easements over county-owned land. So I think this is specific because of the history of this property, of these properties. So I'm comfortable again in moving it forward.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I accept a motion.
I'll move to approve an ordinance granting an access and utility easement and water well easement to Melanie Griffith across the 87 load, which is Pitkin County owns a 1/4 interest in. And this is a first reading with a public hearing on December 20th.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's see. Next is a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Regional Transportation Planning Region as established by the Colorado Department of Transportation.
He's back.
That's right. I'm back.
Not
Thank
asking
you.
for money this time.
No. I'm G.R. Fielding. I'm the county engineer. I'm filling in for Brian Pettit. He's on vacation this week. Before we use the resolution to enter the Intermountain Transportation Planning Region, it is an organization that the county has been a member of for quite some time. It is a group of governments through the mountain corridors of Colorado, and they meet to prioritize projects for state funding. The reason that this is before you is that CDOT has requested some slight changes to the language of the agreements, and no one could remember the last time that we had approved our membership to this, so it was probably good housekeeping to bring this back before the board. I believe George has gone to most, if not all, of the meetings in the last however many years, and can probably give some insight of the type of projects that the group contemplates. And so that's really about it for this item.
So what were the cleanups that CDOT felt they needed? I mean, it's hard
When
for
we
me to
call-
have nothing to compare it to.
When we called CDOT to ask them what the exact language cleanups were, it had been so long since they had actually drafted this that.
So it's cleaned up, we
Couldn't
just don't
remember.
know quite how.
Well, yes, it's pretty innocuous if I remember correctly, Patty.
Yeah, I think they're probably just trying to ensure that those who are sitting at the table are the legitimate representatives as a member of the commission. They have the right to vote
Right.
for their jurisdiction or their entity.
So every year when we reappoint George, do we then notify CDOT that George is our selected between Brian and George?
I'm not sure exactly how that works, George, but
Right, yeah. When we do all of our boards and commissions, and we always notify
Then we notify that.
everybody that who's
agency
serving as the regular and the alternate.
And the backup. Okay,
Correct.
great. I'll make a motion to approve, set for second reading on December the 20th. So resolution, the Board of County Commissioners approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Regional Transportation Planning Commission, which was established by the Colorado Department of Transportation to participate as a member of the commission. And George, thank you for the time you put in.
It's okay. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, GR.
thank you.
Thanks, JR.
Okay, last on these first readings is an ordinance authorizing entering into a tower space lease agreement and donation agreement with Cimarron Communications.
Hi, Phyllis Mattice, Assistant County Manager. We've been working on this transaction for quite a while, working with our attorney, who's an FCC specialist in DC, as well as with John Ely, putting together a lease for tower space on our Jackrabbit communication site, which is off of Owl Creek Road, and in turn a donation of an FM license also for that same location. That FM license will be up to the Translator Advisory Board to review any applications and to make recommendations for the board of what they feel would be the best FM station to fill that space. I did include in your packet the process that we have developed over the years on how we interview for those FM stations that are interested in being there, and then the evaluation criteria that was developed by John Emmerich, the chair of our current Translator Advisory Board. It's unlikely that there's going to be many more FM licenses provided by the FCC in the near future. This process took approximately 10 years. Pitkin County received 3 in 2013, and it was the result of an application we made back in 2003. So it was a 10-year process for them identifying what they could provide. And they really grant a construction permit, so what they give you is 3 years to get your FM station on the air, whatever station you want to choose. So the Translator Advisory Board did go through that, and we had a station added at Crown, one at Sunlight, and one at Aspen. I can't remember them all, but one we awarded to Radio CMC as they were just kicking off so they could have additional space, and I believe that was the one at Crown, since they also have the Spring Valley campus. So now we're going to be able to provide space there at Jackrabbit. It's quite a bit of work to see what stations can be received there, because the translator takes a signal that's being provided from an original location and essentially translates it or bounces it on and passes it through to another area so it can be heard in that area also. So it's not, it's an interesting process. And that's also why when you ride up and down the valley and you want to listen to one station, you have to keep changing numbers because it's being translated from its original broadcast location up the valley. So that's what we have. And then the tower space will be for one of the licenses that Cimarron received in that same process. And we have the space available to give that to them. And they'll be responsible for all their own equipment.
Okay, Patty?
So I know we've been working on this for a while, but the information in the agreement does say it started November 1st, 2017. So will we be correcting that, or will we be backtracking to November 1st?
We're going to use the November 1st date. They aren't able to construct anything there, so it's kind of on hold. So
Okay, so
the
we're
date
good.
doesn't really matter.
Okay. And then I found a date on the FCC FM broadcast translator booster station license, and it says this license expires at 3 a.m. local time on April the 1st, 2021. So are we getting a license that's going to expire in 2021? I don't know how that works. I'm not familiar with the
Which
FCC.
document are you in, Patty?
It's,
So I can,
it's on the Federal Communications. It's from the United States of America.
their document.
With the license
I'll-
covers permit too.
I can have our,
Second read.
yeah, I'll have our FCC attorney research that.
Because I want to make sure if we're
And-
doing this, it's not going to end in 2021.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good catch, Patty, because I remember years ago, we never renewed some of our
Right.
TV stations, including PBS. And we were out of PBS for several years until we were able to get back into that contract.
Right.
So,
So we can clear that. There was another one too on the certificate of liability insurance. All the policies have expired on November the 14th, 2017.
Yeah, and then
I
they'll,
also don't know how that pertains, but the dates were interesting.
yeah, they're good for only 1 year, so when they wanted to provide us something for November 1st, it would be that one, and they're going to have to provide us for another one. Yeah,
Right now
they're-
we don't have liability insurance, apparently. But, okay, those are the only concerns that I had after reading the information very closely.
any other questions?
Thank you.
I'm looking for a motion then.
I will make a motion to approve an ordinance authorizing entering into a tower space lease agreement and the donation agreement with Cimarron Communications Company LLC. Separate second reading, public hearing on December the 20th.
Second. Take your
Who got
pick.
that?
George, or Steve got it.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Okay. Let's knock off these next two little public hearings, second readings, then we'll take a break if that's okay with the
Oh,
board.
great idea.
So the first is, again, these are public hearings. These are second readings. The first is a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement with Eagle County for public health planning services.
Hi.
Hello again, Karen Kenneman, Pitkin County Public Health Director. I'm here for the second reading of our IGA with Eagle County, in which Pitkin County Public Health provides public health planning services for Eagle County Public Health. And the purpose of this IGA is really to establish an ability for representation for Eagle County within the Roaring Fork Valley. So trying to synthesize and collaborate and make sure we're aligning our Eagle County public health efforts, Pitkin County public health efforts, and inevitably Garfield County public health efforts through some of our regional planning efforts that we've been doing. So it really does fall in line with trying to regionalize our community health improvement plan, trying to look at regional partners, regional nonprofits, and the work that they're doing in the Roaring Fork, and ensuring that all of that work is collaborative and working together. So the IGA is for not to exceed $51,500, and we have this in place right now, but we wanted to go ahead and start to get working on next year's IGA with them. So that's what this is for 2018 work.
Questions?
Just, are there any change, there's no changes from first reading?
No.
Steve?
Well, in the Exhibit A, it talks about the Pitkin employee who will be doing this. Is that Jordana Sabella,
Yes.
who is the current employee who would be doing this role?
Exactly, Steve, yes.
Okay.
So, yep.
I thought it was, but I thought I would ask because it
Sure.
didn't specify.
Yeah.
So I'd move to approve the ordinance off the resolution approving the IGA with Eagle County for public health planning services. And also I note this is a public hearing, George.
Oh, thank you, Steve. I'll wait for do we have a second?
Sure, second.
Okay, this is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to speak on this? I'll keep the public hearing open to the next item as well. So I just editorize something here. This is the second IGA we've done today. The first was with Garfield County on child support. This is with Eagle County. So we have some great relationships with Eagle County and Garfield County on health and human services, and it really benefits all the residents throughout the Roaring Fork Valley. And wouldn't it be great if we were able to have an IGA with Eagle County and Garfield County on land use? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Instead of having these ill-advised developments that get approved and without really understanding the impacts to all the residents of the valley, which impact our health and human services, by the way.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
We're going to task you with that one, George.
see how that feedback I get on that one. Okay, with that, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, great, thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is an ordinance authorizing a lease agreement with the Aspen Skiing Company for the Loge Communications site.
Hello, Kara Silbernagle, Management Analyst with Pitkin County. So before you is the second reading. This is for the Loge Communication site, which is part of our public safety and broadband initiative. As you guys recall, that we built the tower last year, and then we needed a place to put all the equipment for the tower. So this does not have to do directly with the tower, but is an agreement with Ski Co. for patrol headquarters facility at the top of Loge Peak for the equipment that will operate the tower.
Okay, questions? Patty?
Names this time. On page 9, we just need to change the name of the chairman.
Sorry, say that.
The name of the chairman on the page 9.
Oh, we've been working on this for a while.
Yeah, I know. Another one of those. So, yeah, I will make a motion to approve the ordinance authorizing the lease agreement after we have public hearing.
I just had a question regarding, can I ask the question, or does she need a second first?
Second.
Where are we?
Let's get a second so I don't forget.
Second.
Okay, questions and discussion.
Question, I remember last time this came up, was it with Loge that we had an individual from the local radio club who was talking about, I think they had radio communications up there somehow on that tower as well, and they'd like to be able to get that back, as I understand. This is a group of, it's not ham operators, but it's a local radio network that does provide a volunteer public service, it could be argued. Sheldon Fingerman? Was he
Yeah, and we'll need to, I cannot remember where that issue came out at this point, but I do know Jeff Kruger was touching base with them about the equipment and ability to use the tower. This lease is a little bit different in that it's really about the equipment in the patrol shack.
Got it.
And so we'll have to follow up. That one was quite a while ago, and I just can't remember now
That was with
where we
Sheldon,
came
it
out
could have
on
been
that.
Aspen Mountain or Lowe's, I can't remember which.
And part of this is for just reference with this whole site on Loge. Pitkin County formerly had a communication site on Loge that was actually located near the Olympic Bowl chairlift. And so as we started down this, we found quite a bit of miscellaneous equipment throughout there. So the Loge reference became confusing even for us. So it might be amongst those different sites. So we can follow up on that.
Great.
This is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Steve?
This mentions that the ski company had to postpone the building of restrooms for the public use because of this project. Now, have they been able to put restrooms in the meantime since we started working on this project?
So it's taken a few different iterations. So what they ended up doing is SkiCo had to postpone just with some of their funding. They reprioritized. And so what they did is where they kind of reorganized how we built out the building versus originally the equipment was going to go in with the addition. They were great and allowed us to kind of remodel one room, and then the addition will be dedicated to the bathrooms. And I believe, actually, I'm not sure if they were working on the bathrooms this year or next year, but it was all related to SkiCo's funding. But they have Forest Service approval for it, so just it's been kind of on their laundry list for a while to work with it.
Well, I hope for the public's comfort and safety that they were able to get it put in for this season.
Yeah.
It's either comfort or safety. Take your pick.
Yeah.
Kara, you note in the memo that it's anticipated that the site will be operational with the microwave backhaul and the digital trunk radio system, public safety radio equipment by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Was that still hold true? The end of the year is a few weeks away.
That was the plan. I think so.
Still is the plan?
There's different. I'm going to let Phyllis come up and speak
Didn't
to
say
it.
end of which year.
Oh, well, that's
Yeah. Big.
Phyllis
the trick.
Mattice, Assistant County Manager. They were still planning, the propane was in, the generator was in, all of that equipment, the state equipment is up there. So right now, it looks like it will be turned on. The joy, they were working on Hunter Creek and Snowmass when Snowmass just came on at the town hall a couple weeks ago, which enabled all of public safety to turn on. So there's a less priority with the top of Loge Peak because you can get there by chairlift all winter long. So they're still planning on the end of the year.
So then,
But
will this then allow cellular access, like up by Maroon Lake, for emergencies?
If there's a cellular carrier that's interested, I know Ski Company is looking for what's available. Of course, the Forest Service is very concerned about cellular service in the wilderness. That will be a hurdle to be overcome on what direction antennas are facing and where the service can be provided.
Right, but I always, Maroon Lake is not in the wilderness per se, but I always thought that was one of the benefits was to be able to have emergency response for that area because it gets so much backcountry use. And right now, by the time you get someone out and get someone back in, it takes a long time.
We're hoping to be cellular. There's some other solutions that we could come up with, which is because public safety radio will be there and you can see Maroon Lake from that low spot, we could put a direct radio contact, like an emergency box that directly goes to dispatch from there. So those are kind of our backup solutions, depending on what we can attract in the way of carriers and what kind of hurdles Forest Service or restrictions Forest Service wants to put on it. But being able to provide for public safety is really a key in some of those areas. Yes, saving the 10 miles driving down the road till you can get service would be really helpful.
So, George, the scope of this project right now would immediately provide for the digitally trunked radio, public safety radio, as well as the backhaul for our internet backhaul, middle mile backhaul. The infrastructure could be used for cell service, and that is one of the sites that we identified, but immediately there's no carrier that would go on there.
And I do have an answer on the radio club that's looking at that. That would be a direct agreement with Ski Company. They have a separate room. So they had approval for Ski Company to be in that little shack that was the Ollie Bowl shack that I think everything's trying to get out of that room. It was a pretty funky room, to be polite. So I think they approached Ski Company, so we don't know what's going on, but I know Ski Company thought it was a good service because it is a backup communication service in emergencies.
Right.
Just regarding something John just said regarding the middle mile or the final mile, does that mean there'll be is it a microwave link up there that will receive broadband, and it won't be disseminating Wi-Fi from up there?
No.
Okay, just wondering so there's a broadband node up at the top of Loge, but that's going to connect to other microwave links.
It has the potential to, but that we're still trying to figure out what kind of service comes direct from those primary towers, such as Lowe's, versus a direct-to-direct connect.
Right. Just wondering what's the range on that? What is the range from if there's a node at the top of Loge, how many miles will that
Isn't it
carry?
7 miles?
Depends on the different spectrum. Yeah.
So it's a matter of miles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is miles, and of course, granite prevents the waves from moving. So.
Right.
Okay, let's see, we have a motion of a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Great, thank you.
Thanks.
So let's take a break before we go into our public hearings. What would the board like, 10, 15 minutes?
Okay, perfect.
Which one,
great.
10 or 15?
10's fine for
10's 5, 10-minute break?
5 or 10, whatever.
10-minute break. right, we're going to go on to our land use public hearings. The first is a resolution. It's the Celestial Land Company LTD reinstatement of vested rights. This has been continued to February 28th. I need a motion to continue that to Feb 28th.
Second?
It's a public hearing. Anybody wishing to comment on this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on this one. And we have a motion, a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye, thank you. Next is a resolution denying an appeal by Christopher Henderson of BOA Resolution 02-2017, denying variance request.
Hi, I'm Joanna Schaffner, planner in the Community Development Department.
William Palmer, attorney in Carbondale, and I represent Mr. Henderson. Represented him through the underlying Board of Adjustment hearing, and now I'm here for the appeal of that decision.
Okay, Joanne, you want to give us some background on this?
Sure. So in September, the Board of Adjustment heard a request for a 1-foot setback off of the, off of Highway 133, so that they can have a ranch gate crossing their driveway. The property is 1 acre in a 30-acre zone district. It's located between the highway and the river, and it's impacted by both the 100-foot setback off of the highway and a 100-foot setback off of the river. The board denied the application due to a lack of a demonstrated hardship. The applicant is appealing the denial and is represented by their attorney, Trent Palmer, seated here. So go ahead. And
well, wait a second. So again, just so we understand what we're doing here, this is an appeal. It's not a de novo consideration of the merits of the development application that gave rise to the appeal. So we're really not here to discuss whether that application was correctly approved or denied. We're just here to discuss whether there was a clear and demonstrable error, an abuse of discretion, or denial or procedural due process in the application of the facts in a record to the standards of the land use code. Did I say that correct, John?
That's a correct recitation of the land use code language that controls the hearing. Joanna's cover memo, AIS, however it's titled, recites all the pertinent code language that applies to this appeal procedure.
Okay.
So it is not a de novo review of an application, which is to say the board hears what the request was and it makes its own determination of the appropriateness of granting it or denying it. The board simply, well, not necessarily simply, but the board analyzes the decision that the lower review body, in this case the Board of Adjustment, made in determining whether or not a variance should be granted. So in determining that, the BOCC then analyzes the BOA's decision as to whether or not it exceeded its jurisdiction, did not apply the appropriate criteria, considered matters that weren't before it, or some other aspect of their procedure that did not line up squarely with the land use code criteria.
Okay, and then we have the ability to either approve, reverse, modify, or remand back.
Correct.
Okay, so the
Well, that you can affirm it, you can reverse it, you can modify it, or you can remand it back.
right. So we have some options as well. Okay. Any questions on that for the board? Okay. So the appellant, you're going to let us know where you think there was a error or abuse of discretion or denial of procedural due process in the application?
I hope so, yes, sir. So we have a transcript of the Board of Adjustment hearing, and it's not too long. I think it's 12, 14 pages, and hopefully you folks have had an opportunity to review that. And I think most of the argument comes with I think the way in which the Board of Adjustment analyzed the variance request in the context of the statute itself. And if you look at the language of the land use code that's specific to whether a variance should or should not be granted, it's primarily concerned, and really only concerned, with the specific piece of property. Is there unusual topographic conditions such that it's narrow or shallow, the shape of the property is not conducive to development within the approved setbacks? So that's really what the Board of Adjustment is looking at. We're identifying a specific piece of property. We're determining whether that piece of property is specifically constrained and whether development could occur according to the land use code provisions. As Ms. Shafter mentioned, this property is sandwiched between the Crystal River and Highway 133, effectively across the street from Sustainable Settings. It's a little bit north of that, and it's a 1 acre parcel. And we already have a decision from this body that it is a constrained site, and that was made in 2006, Resolution 11/2006, and that was the original approval, I believe, for development of the house. And it says, it's resolved by the Board of Adjustment that a 50-foot major road setback be granted for the construction of a single-family house. And the reason, again, was because there was no way that development could have occurred 100 feet away from the Crystal River, or excuse me, from the Highway 133. And so what you have now is a house, a single-family house on this 1 acre parcel that is about 50 or 60 feet from the highway, and then it meets the historic river setback on the other side. And so the determination about this specific piece of property being constrained has already been made by this board, and that's the position that we tried to take to the Board of Adjustment, which is that this is a constrained site. And again, the approval criteria in 24110 for variances, subsection B, the board approves variances where there's these topographic conditions that we discussed, and the granting of relief from the strict application of the land use code will not substantially detriment the public good. So that's what the Board of Adjustment was charged with analyzing. There's nothing in this language about what the development is going to be. What is the nature of what the individual is building or would like to have there? In this case, we have a ranch gate. There's a fence that goes around the circumference of the property, the perimeter of the property, which I think is perfectly consistent with the land use code. And then we have a structure that Mr. Henderson built, I would say a year or a year and a half ago at this point, and it's brick columns with a typical metal ranch gate on both sides of that. And specifically, I'll draw your attention to a few pages of this transcript. If you look at, let's see, I don't know if I'm going to be able to draw your attention specifically. It's page 4, about halfway down the page. You have the commissioners.
I don't know where that would be in our packet.
Is it in the transcript part of the
Right,
Board
if
of
you could,
Adjustment hearing?
Yeah, there's a page 4.
if you could locate the transcript and then go to pages 4 and 5 of the transcript. And you can see at the top of page 4, this is of course me addressing the Board of Adjustment, and I make the same point that I just made to the board here, which is this is a constrained 1 acre site. It's between the river and the highway. The history of this lot is that the county commissioners have already found a hardship in the original development application approving the house that exists. And then if you go to the next page, the county commissioners, it says male, I'm not sure, or excuse me, the adjustment commissioners, it says male, I'm not sure which one it was. It says, you know, I've seen gates that are smaller than that enter 500 acre ranches. This is a 1 acre property. It's pretty amazing. And your demonstrated hardship is what? This is lines 17 through 20. On the following page 6, towards the bottom, line 20, again, it says male. I'm not sure which commissioner it was, not that it matters. It says, I'm having trouble with this because to me it's very decorative, it's over the top, to be honest with you. I wish I could find a reason for this. Announcing you're arriving at the property, but I'd like to know what the other board members have to say about it. So what you have here is a situation where the Board of Adjustment is analyzing the gate itself. What is it? We don't like it. It's decorative. We don't appreciate that it's there. And that is beyond the scope of the criteria within the variance analysis. And that's why we're appealing to this board, because again, if you look at the strict language of the approval criteria, it says effectively analyze whether this is a constrained site or not. Can you build things in the setback? And if you can, do it. If you can't, then the board grants variances, and we think they should have done so in this case. And to interject, so to speak, this analysis of the gate itself and what its purpose is and what are you doing with this is beyond the scope of the variance analysis, and that's why we're here. And we believe, Mr. Henderson believes, that the hardship question has already been determined in the land use applications for the development of his home. And so that's where we are. The gate's there, and certainly I'm here to answer any questions the commissioners have about how this whole process came to light, how it came to be.
So, John, would it be appropriate to ask, when I look at some of these notes, the question was it red tagged? And it was red tagged. Is that relevant at all, that it was red tagged and the status of that red tagging?
You mean when you're looking at the transcript and the discussion
Yes.
of that? It's clear that I think it's clear anyway, the Board of Adjustment looked at the fact that the property had already been developed, and with this particular gate, not the house and everything else, but the gate that was the structure that a variance was sought for was built prior to an application being filed. And as a consequence, when staff found out about it, there was a notice of violation or a red tag put on the property, and then the property owner sought to legalize or legitimize the structure by going to the Board of Adjustment. The relevancy beyond just a more descriptive history of what was going on the property, which is always to some degree relevant, is not there for purposes of evaluation of the request or the hardship. I note that in a couple of spots in the record, beginning on transcript page 7 and continuing to around page 10, there's a reference by some of the board members saying that because this was already built, there is a stricter standard of review than there would be if the structure wasn't built before an application for a variance was filed. And I think that is probably relevant for the BOCC to consider, in that there is no such criteria in our code whereby a more strict review standard is employed if the structure had been built in violation of a code standard.
And
Does that answer your question, George?
It helps. And even though it was red tagged after the structure was already built, so it's not like they were able to stop the structure halfway in construction. It was already done.
Right.
So the only recourse that the county might have or had would be to have the applicant take the structure down.
Correct. And if the applicant or property owner did not want to, then the county has the ability to bring a legal action, obtain injunctive relief, to require compliance with the land use code by the property owner, which would require removal of the structure. The county's practice, however, and this is in recognition of the typical desire of the district court, which is where we would go to get such relief, is to not try to get a removal of a structure prior to a determination, a final determination if the structure is okay. It would create an economic waste to go in and remove something just to approve it later and have it rebuilt. So the practice of the county is to, once a structure or something has been red tagged, to allow the property owner to go through an application process to legalize or legitimize the structure or the use, whatever is going on. If that can't be accomplished, then the property owner then has to bring the property into compliance with the code. So if a variance is not ultimately obtained for the structure, in this case, it would have to be removed. If a variance is obtained, then the structure would not have to be removed.
And that's,
Have to go through
and that's pretty much the process we're in right now.
Exactly.
Okay. thank
So
you.
the application was filed after a notice of violation was given the property owner, and in response to that, the property owner sought to legalize it. So they filed an application for that variance with the Board of Adjustment.
Patty?
So my question goes to, hardship was established for the house, one process. This is a new process, having to go back to the Board of Adjustments with a different application for a variance based on the gate. So to me, that's different. So I think it would be up to them to establish a hardship for this structure, regardless of the hardship that was established for the house. It's a different process.
I'm assuming so. I'm looking through the attachments. I don't, Joanna, is the original variance in here?
Yes.
Where is
The
that?
application?
But it's just
No,
for the house.
the original, not the application, but the original variance for the house.
Oh,
That's Resolution 11, 2006, and it was in our original.
it was part of the original application to the Board of Adjustment.
Is that in here?
I went
Yes.
from 2000.
I think that's a fair point, and I think certainly if he were to, had he gone through the process to request a variance independently for this gate, certainly he would have asked the county commissioners to make the same decision that they made about the lot that they made the first time around, which is that this is a constrained site. And so I take your point that certainly that decision would have had to be made again had he gone
Right.
through
So
the
to
application
me,
process.
it's a whole new decision-making process, because at least for me, the decision for a hardship for a home is quite different than a decision for a hardship based on a constrained lot for a gate.
And Patty, the language
That's
on
a
the,
certain purpose.
on the initial variance is specifically limited to a single-family residence.
So we're kind of
as-
starting all over again with the variance process for the gate.
For a new structure.
So that would be up to them to establish whether or not there was a hardship based on this gate,
Right.
not on the house. Okay.
And I appreciate what Mr. Ely said. It is on page 7, and again, it says male. I don't know who it was, but they say the history of this board historically looks more strictly on structures that have already been built,
It's a
or
different
where the applicant comes and seeks a variance after constructing this, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what we're saying is that is nowhere to be found in the land use code, that there are different standards for whether something was built before a permit was issued or whether they're coming and seeking the variance after the fact. So the whole idea that the Board of Adjustment would frown upon this because he came in later, or they don't like the gate itself and deny the application, I think is in direct contrast to the approval criteria in the variance section. And
That's a different point than from what my
but
point
to
was.
expound on what you're saying, I think is, yes, you have to decide if it's a constrained site in a separate analysis for the house or for the gate. But if you look critically at the approval criteria, that's the only thing that the Board of Adjustment should decide is this a constrained site? And if it is, then that's the basis for a variance.
Well,
And it
and
doesn't
there's a
have to
hardship,
do with.
they have to establish there's a hardship based on the constrained site. I mean,
And the hardship is that no development could occur anywhere on the site had strict compliance with the land use code and the setbacks been enforced. And that's why the variance was required in the beginning, and that's why a variance would have been required and would still be required for any type of development on that property, no matter what it is. And we don't have, as far as I know, specific code provisions dealing with ranch gates. And so because of that, given the limited criteria that the Board of Adjustment had to consider in analyzing this variance, I do think it's clear that with respect to Section 220-180 on appeals that they did abuse their discretion in denying this variance request. And you'll see it again on page 9, lines 5 through 10. This is where I made the same point, I think, before to the Board of Adjustment, which is I certainly understand the position or the comments that the commissioners made about the need to show some purpose for this gate that's out there. Respectfully, that purpose is not a consideration under the approval criteria in the land use code. So the decision and the way that they went about the decision beyond the scope of the criteria, and we certainly believe that they abuse their discretion. And I think certainly this board has a wide range of options at its disposal to either approve the decision as it stands, remand it, change it. We would just ask that, I mean, the simplest way I think in our minds would be for the Board of County Commissioners to reverse the decision and allow and grant the variance request based on the evidence in front of them.
I mean, my problem always is, you've got someone who's pleading ignorance and asking for forgiveness, and it seems like our code doesn't address what happens if a property has been red tagged, if it hasn't gone through the appropriate process to obtain a building permit, which would then have prompted that discussion in terms of a variance. And again, I'm still not clear whether that's something we can use as a decision point.
Well, as I mentioned, it's background information on how the property came to be before the board, how the issue was generated, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But the task that the BOCC has is determining whether or not the BOA exceeded their jurisdiction or did not abuse their discretion, and an indication that their discretion was abused is if they considered factors that are not appropriate for decision making. In other words, employed a criteria that's not outlined in the code. And although, depending on the activity, it may color, the opinions of a reviewing board, the fact of it is that there are no criteria in any of our codes to deal more harshly with a property that is coming in and trying to get approval after the fact, or a property that's coming in the usual course and seeking approval before building some structure. That's just not a criteria to be employed. So it is troubling that the BOA indicated that they have a stricter standard of review, if you will, for a property that's coming in, as this one did, as opposed to a property that came in with an application before anything was built. That criteria, that stricter review that the BOA indicated that it was employing, it just doesn't exist. So that is somewhat troubling. I mean, I personally, from looking at the content of the transcript, I can see how the BOA can get to the point of finding that a hardship doesn't exist based upon the situation of the property and the underlying zoning regulation establishing setbacks and height restrictions. And I can also see how they might get to a point where they would find that is a hardship, but to color their decision based upon a criteria that doesn't exist is troubling.
So it becomes a little more subjective, is what you're saying.
It's being reviewed according to a standard that doesn't exist in our code.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Patty.
So I'm leaning towards remanding it back to the Board of Adjustments and having them take their consideration of establishing a hardship without regard to the red tag status for that property. Because I don't necessarily, it's probably them calling me now, I don't necessarily feel that they would automatically establish a hardship because of the constrained lot. But I think that that John's right, that they should not have brought into the fact we're going to act more, we're going to be more severe because of the red tag status. So I would like to remand it back to them and have them consider whether or not a hardship is present based on the topographic issues of the constrained lot and without regard to the red tag status.
So in other words, have them look at it with fresh eyes
without regard to there being red tag.
Yeah, yeah. Other questions or comments?
Just my feeling about this is that, you know, this is the perfect example of beg forgiveness rather than ask permission, regardless of the claim of innocence of the landowner to the rules. Of course, we know ignorance isn't a criteria you can use. It doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't sound good to me. So it's a touchy situation. Sending it back to the BOA so they do it properly would probably, I guess that makes sense to me. But I'm uncomfortable with it, and I don't know how to proceed yet.
And I wouldn't say remanding it back for them to do it properly.
Well, to reconsider it then. Thank you.
Based on,
Well, to encapsulate what Patty is saying, is you can remand the application and its review back to the BOA to consider the application under the criteria of the land use code, and just leave it as that. And
Okay, thank you.
without regard to the red tag status.
And certainly, that's a better outcome for the applicant than if the Board of County Commissioners were to simply uphold the decision and that's it. But I think that practically speaking, if we think about what's going to happen if this Board of County Commissioners remands this back to the same Board of Adjustment and tells them, to analyze this under the criteria of the land use code and decide, I don't know that we're going to be able to have any different outcome, because I think the bias is clear. I think the prejudice is clear given the record from the prior transcript. And I think that's why we would certainly prefer the relief from this board, which would just be to reverse the decision, allow the variance to stand, and everyone moves on. And with respect to the commissioner's comments about pleading ignorance, certainly I take your point, and I even said that in the previous transcript. I think if you look, I did say that, and I don't know. I certainly can't represent what Mr. Henderson nor didn't know at the time this happened, because I wasn't part of it. And you'll see one of the other Board of Adjustment members asked a question about, well, I don't even believe the ignorance because here we have this nice packet that explains all the land use code provisions and you're asking for it, But again, that all happened much later, right? So probably the way this happened is Mr. Henderson built this gate according to what he knows to be the general mode of practice, and he's from Princeton, New Jersey. That's where he's lived most of his life. He's done other applications in other places, and he just flat out did not know probably that anything needed to be done with the county to do some sort of gate or fence work at the perimeter of his property. And it existed for several months, many months, before anyone did anything about it. There was no complaints from the neighbors. There were no calls to the county. There was no public outcry. None of that led to this. I believe that it was Ms. Schaffner, actually, who works for the county, who saw this and red tagged it herself. So certainly you could ask her about how that happened. I don't know. But as soon as Mr. Henderson got notice of this non-compliance, he immediately did what Ms. Schaffner and I think other folks from the county suggested, which was, why don't you prepare an application and go before the board and get this approved once and for all? And I think his response was, sure, I'll be happy to do it. So that's how it happened. Spent the money, got before the Board of Adjustment, and as you can tell, we basically got laughed out of the room. And that's why we're here before the Board of County Commissioners, because the reason for the denial, as pointed out by Mr. Ely, is totally out of whack with what the code says the Board of Adjustment could consider. And so,
Well, I would take issue with a few of your comments. Mr. Henderson may not have known what the process was, but I'm assuming he did not build the gate. I'm assuming he used a local contractor who should have known. A lot of times our staff does find things that are not within the right code as they're driving around the county. So red tagging is not unusual for county staff to notice and to red tag. And I don't think you got laughed out of the BOA hearing at all. So I would take issue with that. So I understand that you would love to see us just approve this, and then you can go back and tell your client that you were successful. But I'm more in line with Patty to remand this back, have the BOA to take a reconsideration of this, looking at the land use code and not trying to utilize their own stricter code because of any bias, and make that very clear, and then see where that goes. Steve?
I'm wondering if the fence around the property line was already built at a previous time and that this gate was added at a later time, or was the fence around the property built at the same time as the gate was?
I think the fence existed for a previous structure. There was a mobile home or something on there, wasn't it?
I don't know when the existing fence went in. The ranch gate went in probably a year and a half ago.
And would the fence have been okay to build where it was along the property line without getting a variance, just a low
The fence itself did not require a variance.
And
This
is it
ranch gate-
because this was higher than 30 inches, that a structure higher than 30 inches?
No, it's a 6-foot limit for fences in the setback. So if the gate were reduced to 6 feet, then it would be compliant. It's because it exceeds 6 feet in height.
Thank you. So, George, I know it's a public hearing, but you want me to go ahead and make a motion?
I'll open the public hearing first. Thanks, Patty. Public hearing, anybody wishing to make a comment on this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing.
So I'm going to make a motion to remand this back to the Board of Adjustment for a reconsideration of their determination without taking into consideration the red tag status of this property at this time.
I'll second that.
And can we make a friendly amendment and to refer specifically to the land use code? Because what I heard was they were using sort of their own stricter land use code.
Well, yeah, that kind of, to me, should be what they do, but we can put that in there. So I will accept an amendment to add to my motion, Jeanette, that we will request that they really go by the provisions as part of the land use code.
Second that.
Okay, further discussion. Steve?
My gut feeling is that we should just overturn the decision, but I'm willing to send it back to the Board of Adjustment. I have a personal prejudice against this type of gate also, but I'm blocking that out, that it's, you know, a typical kind of gate that people build these days, and for you know, a nice house with a nice driveway and landscaping, it's kind of a typical thing in the county right now, even though I don't personally like those kind of gates, but I think that the Board of Adjustment did not follow the proper procedure in their decision, and I think it's obvious looking at the transcript that they were kind of in a joking kind of atmosphere and some of the things that were said. So I don't think they followed this, you know, took this seriously and really studied it based on the merits of what the land use code said.
Okay. Sometimes it's hard to tell, read into a transcript in terms of the tone and the manner of a meeting as well. So, you know, not taking it seriously, being laughed out of the room. I mean, for me, that's very difficult, not having been there. So I could not support those types of statements.
And I certainly understand why you raised it. You took issue with the way that I phrased that. So, and I certainly wasn't trying to, you know, offend anyone on the board or anyone here. And certainly with Ms. Schaffner, the history of how this happened, I was just saying this for, you know, information purposes so that this board will understand the process from start to finish. And I think one of the reasons, as Mr. Child discussed, that, you know, that it took someone from the county to red tag this was because, to notice and red tag this, is because it's in the Crystal Valley across from Sustainable Settings, and there's a bunch of these gates out there. And you know, it's not atypical. There's nothing weird about this. It does seem to fit with the nature of the area and everything else going on around there. It's not a typical 100, 200 acre ranch with a bunch of cattle. That's true. But the ranch gate itself and the area and the location is not out of place, and I don't think any of the neighbors or anyone from the public has ever taken issue with it. And we've done the notice now for two separate hearings, and no one's here. And as far as I know, no one's written any letters or had anything to say about this. And that's where we are.
Okay. Well, we've got a motion, we've got a second. I'm going to call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, next is a resolution approving an extension of vesting rights for GSS Assets LLC / Sun Mesa property.
Throw away my key.
Just put your map up there. Don't want to get in trouble. Suzanne Wolf for Community Development. Maybe I'll hold on to it. So just quickly to orient you on the property. Sorry, kind of awkward. Here's Woody Creek Road. This is the property right here. You can see the big mesa. And this is the steep slope down to Woody Creek Road. I think some of you are familiar with this property from when it went through the prior review process. But anyway, just to give you kind of your bearings, the community school is all the way up here. This is directly across from the Craig Ranch properties that also continue up on this side adjacent to this property. It's approximately 60 acres.
Former Craig Ranch, right?
Can I ask a question, Rick? Can you show me just kind of the area where we looked at lots of different options for driveways? Where in the basic area is the one that would be on the adjacent property owners, which I believe is the Hollows?
Yep.
But I didn't see option A, B, C, D, E, F, and G in here. How many passed?
Yeah, that'll show it. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm on. So, Patty, so yeah, I think this helps. The Holloway property is here.
Okay.
And so, again, right, there were many alternatives for variations of coming off of Woody Creek Road directly.
Right.
The one alternative was using the existing driveway coming up through the Holloway property, which does bring you up onto the mesa. There's an existing ranch road. I know some of you might have been on that site visit a while ago that came up. The issue there was that there's a specific easement to allow for that access, which would not accommodate the driveway standard that would be required for construction of a residence up there to meet the needs to get a fire truck and things like that up there. So, but that's that location.
Okay.
I'll leave that one up because this does show, just kind of gives you that overview, but it shows you the envelope. Actually, maybe let me grab. This one is the site. So
Okay,
this was the approved and recorded site plan that shows the final agreed upon driveway location coming up across that steep slope, and then coming up to the envelope, the location of the house up here, kind of at that upper edge of that mesa. So to backtrack since not everyone was along for the ride before. Move back to this.
Do I have to do all of that? You should be good. If you just stay put in front of that microphone, I think you'll be fine. Again, I don't think I won't walk through all the details on the history, but obviously there was sort of an involved series of applications related to the property, starting with the denial of an activity envelope due to the slope issue related to the access. The envelope itself for the house didn't have issues. It's basically that issue has all been about the driveway. So there was a denial for the activity envelope that was then remediated through a takings hearing. There was an application for site plan review for a driveway within that envelope that had been established, which was denied. There was a site plan application for a driveway through the Holloway property that was denied. Through basically those two denials came forward through a takings to you, at which time approval was granted, which resulted in this site plan that's been recorded in front of you. So there was a finding that the taking had occurred and approved the driveway alternative that's shown here. The use of TDRs for 2,500 square feet of additional floor area. So basically, we've approved a residence of 8,250 up there. The applicant agreed at that time, committed at that time, where the code would only require one TDR to get to that 8,250. They agreed that they would extinguish two at such time as the house is built. So it was two TDRs for the 8,250 and approved the site plan for the residence in that location. The vested rights expire in February of 2018, so a couple months from now. So the applicant is requesting a 3-year extension of those vested rights. The applicant has not yet commenced construction of the driveway or residence, is looking for an extension in order to continue discussions with the adjoining neighbor, as Patty mentioned, the Holloway family, to see if there's a better driveway option and kind of to buy more time basically before they might start to construct this driveway.
Suzanne, is the Holloway property to the east?
It's to the north.
To the north.
So here on this, I'll show you on. This is Holloway on this side. So there's the existing Holloway residence. Okay. And then you can see this existing ranch road comes up here. So their driveway comes off of Woody Creek down here, circles past up by the residence in here, and then up to the mesa. So there wouldn't be a new cut off of Woody Creek Road. It would potentially utilize the existing driveway to a certain point, where then they would be looking to find a way to construct a driveway up to the mesa. They would still have the issue of developing on slopes of over 30% in order to build a standard driveway, but the visual impact would obviously be different by not being directly on Woody Creek Road, facing Woody Creek Road.
So this is a request for to maintain their vested rights for 3 more years with the intent of negotiating with the Hollowells.
Right. This established the vested right by extending for 3 years. This approval is vested, so they have the ability to move forward with this, but they continue to have the conversations to look at alternatives and see if there is another better option for the property. Just quickly, I won't walk through all the criteria. I did that in my memo in terms of what you consider related to an extension of vested rights. In terms of compliance, there were no conditions that required compliance. The applicant has pursued different, they received a variance from the Board of Adjustment for the retaining walls. If you remember, some fairly extensive retaining walls. Drilled a well, has done irrigation improvements. There have been no benefits received by the county at this point. Development has not moved forward, so none were required at this point. Obviously, the applicant's argument is that this would give at least an opportunity to see if there's a better option while leaving this approval intact with vested rights. And just, the question with vested rights, too, is if the vested rights expired, has anything changed in the land use code that would affect the approval? And at this point, there really isn't anything. The approved development, other than, the 30% slope issue, which, never conformed, that's why it was a takings, otherwise continues to conform to the terms and provisions of the land use code. So there aren't additional requirements from changes in the code that we would apply. If there had been anything, we would include those as conditions of this extension of vested rights. But so basically, we found that at this point it's in conformance. So we've recommended approval for the 3-year extension of vested rights based on the resolution in front of you.
Patty?
So I don't remember how the negotiations went with the Holloway family before. I know there's been some family circumstances changes with the Holloway family. But if they were to allow them to use the Holloway's existing driveway and come up the shorter way to the mesa, and it does exceed slopes of 30%, would we then have to come back again and go through another takings in order to accept a change in the plan? And probably we'd have to.
Yes. I mean, there would be basically this site plan would be replaced. There would be an application back to
move the driveway,
taking the driveway through the Holloway property. Again, right, would end up through potentially a denial and takings for the driveway.
I know we were concerned about the driveway, the long driveway, expansive cut, and we had a lot of issues with there's a gully or a ditch that comes in right at the base. And so we had some issues with location and fire access, turnarounds, and retaining walls, and the length of this driveway. So, yeah, just to refresh my memory as to why there were concerns there before.
So, I mean, my comments will be that, we spent considerable time on this property, site visits, lots of discussion, public comment, and it seems like you've had 3 years to try to work up a negotiation or another option, and typically with a request for extension of vesting rights, there's some added community benefits, not benefits that were already given with the original approval, but typically there are community benefits to allow for a continued extension of vesting rights, and so I have a problem with that. To think about extending another 3 years for negotiation for me just doesn't make much sense. I would consider a shorter time, because you've already had 3 years. If you can't get something negotiated in the next year, then it's probably not going to happen. I would not sort of prolong this agony and try to get the applicant to be able to move ahead. They've already done some infrastructure work, and let them build their house, but not to procrastinate this for another 3 years just because I don't know what work has been done in the past 3 years in terms of discussions or not. So, and Curtis, you could respond to that. Steve?
The circumstances have changed. Mr. Holloway passed away, so it's a different, the dynamics of the family ownership is different than it was 3 years ago. Also, I think that it is, if the applicant is successful in putting a road through the Holloway property, that would be a huge public benefit, because it would eliminate the need for this road going across the hill with all the retaining walls and everything, which would be, would be an eyesore at best. And I know it's designed as about as well as anything could be designed to try to make it look good. But if Jim is successful in negotiating with the Holloway family over putting the road through their property, the visual impact is going to disappear in terms of the road going up there. So that, to me, would be the public benefit that we would gain from this.
Just to tag on, I think there still will be some visual impact. I'm just not sure whether it be less and not as extensive, but,
Just saying, for me, it looks like an extensive visual impact if the road goes in as they've planned here, and I would certainly love to see them avoid that.
All right, any other questions for Suzanne at this point?
Maybe can I just make one clarification too, just so everyone is clear too, that the vested right, if the vested right expired and wasn't extended, the approval is still valid and is, at that point, subject to any changes that may come in the code, but it would remain, it wouldn't lapse for 10 years from the date of the original approval, essentially. So the approval would still have a life to some degree, but the vested right is what protects them against potential changes in the code that could occur right in the next 3 years if the extension was granted.
Yeah, and we know, hopefully, that we'll be looking at some code changes in regards to TDRs, to GMQS, to house sizes in the next year. I don't know if that will impact us or not, but that's a discussion I'm looking forward to having completed in 2018.
So, do you want to do the public hearing first or after
Oh, I want to, any more questions for
the
Suzanne?
resolution?
Is there any way we can incentivize them, you, to cut this deal?
Well, I was going to turn this over to
It's a
Curtis.
huge impact to
perhaps.
the Holloway
Curtis, do you want to respond to some of these comments and questions?
Sure. Jim Curtis, representing the applicant. Is this thing working?
It
I
picks
really,
it up on
Amplify
I
it.
really hate them,
Good.
so, but just as soon
Just
as
as long as
speak.
it's close enough. You
Okay.
don't have to direct yourself into it.
Let's just kind of go to the issue. I think everyone in this room would prefer the approved driveway not be built. It's probably the best that can be done in that location. The situation with the Holloway family, and they have been phenomenal to work with and discuss. I speak with Roy Holloway about every 2 or 3 months, and unfortunately the father did pass away 6, 7 months ago, maybe longer. It's my understanding the mother is still living on the property, and the family is giving the mother care. And I completely understand and respect this. The response has correctly been from Roy Holloway, as long as a family member is living on the property, there's really nothing we can discuss with you. If a family member is no longer living on the property, yes, we would like to have a discussion with you. Or yes, we will be open to a discussion with you. And I will be quite frank. That discussion is about purchasing the property. We cannot have that discussion now, in due respect, and the Holloways have been fantastic. So I don't see any downside to granting the extension. The underlying approvals do not go away, and the potential upside is you may get a driveway that's really, really better for everyone. No guarantees, but you may. Thank you.
So Curtis, what I just heard you say was that there's really not a path forward as long as one of the family members are still living on the property.
That's what's been communicated to me.
Yeah, so whether it's 3 years or 10 years, this could go, we could see this coming back to us for another 3 years.
May I respond?
Please.
It's a little bit sensitive for me. I want to be very respectful of the Holloways because they've been phenomenal and wonderful. The mother is 96, 97, something in that age. It's been communicated to me her health, there are health issues. How that plays out in the future, I certainly do not know. And don't want to make any statements. Mother is living on the property, and I'm not going to infringe on their wishes as a family. It's that simple.
No, I understand. Just as an aside, my mom turns 98 next week, and I've been going back to see her for 10 years, and every time I go back to her, I think it's the last time I have to go back there.
My only response is, what's the downside? The upside is you may get a better driveway. The downside is if nothing happens, you get what's before you.
Questions for Curtis, for the applicant? If not, I will open this up for a public hearing. Anybody wish to make a comment on this? If you do, just come up to the mic, identify yourself.
They can go up to the podium.
They'll
You
go.
can stay put.
Jim, by the time you get used to this room, we'll be in our new building, so.
Nobody wants to make any public comments? Okay, we'll close the public comments. Bring it back to the board. Steve?
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution approving an extension of vested rights for GSS assets, Sun Mesa property.
I will second it.
Okay, I'm not going to support a 3-year extension. I would support a 1-year extension because I think this should just go on for several years, even though I agree with the idea that because we did spend considerable time walking on all these routes, looking at all the possibilities, and at the time, what we came up with was the only feasible one. So it'd be nice to see an alternative, but I just can't see a 3-year extension. So those would be my comments.
I think I'd go for the 3-year extension, so I'd vote in favor of it.
Okay, we got a motion with a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, speaking of TDRs, Suzanne's going to give us our annual TDR update.
Very informative.
Thank you. So I don't usually say a whole lot about this other than it's really just sort of a data collecting exercise to show you how things are going and how many new TDRs we have and how things are being used. I know it's been a great resource for folks. We put it out on the website, and I hear from a lot of people that they refer to it regularly. So I think it provides a good service to the public as well as us internally to kind of see how the program's going. I will note that starting in 2018, I've been working with BITS. Unfortunately for me, as the program has grown, a lot of this collection is very manual, and I have really bad tables that I use to collect it, and the GIS folks are somewhat appalled and have been very helpful in working to create better databases for me to enter the information and to actually then report back. So this report will look different next year. It will have all of the same type of information, but there's going to be a lot better database working behind the scenes to bring this about, and will leave me not having to sort of manually count through things on Word tables and places where information is not best kept. So my databases have outgrown their effective life, and luckily BITS is stepping in to help with that. So I think it'll be a great product, and actually looking at sort of preliminarily with Mary Lackner, what will be available to the public who want to query things about TDRs will also be, I think, a really neat product available on the website for the public as well as for us. So anyway, I mean, I think that's it. Unless you have questions about any of the information, I'm happy to respond, but.
Yeah, I'll just sort of reiterate my comments earlier. I think that this is really good information always. It's good to see that, as you noted, there's still a slightly greater demand for TDRs than supply at this time, so the two sides still seem to be fairly balanced. But I think this is good information for us to continue to have those discussions in the P&Z as we look at how we can revamp that whole program. Other questions or comments?
I just think the information will be helpful when we bring back our TDR discussion again to figure out what we want to do, how we can find other uses for them, et cetera, which we've been talking about for a long time. I know George has always been trying to help us move forward with that. But
and right, some of the background pieces towards that discussion are starting to be worked on. I mean, Cindy and Ellen have been working with Mary also, you know, kind of looking at scenarios. in terms of under today's zoning, you know, how many more TDRs could potentially be used out there. So anyway, some of that background work is starting to happen.
Good. Anything else? Yeah, Steve.
On the page Exhibit D, there was something that caught my eye. It compares the number of properties in the rural area versus the number in the urban growth boundary area. And there's many more properties that have utilized the TDRs or landed TDRs in the rural area than in the urban growth area. And I think the intention of the program originally was to try to move the density into the urban growth area more than adding to the density in the rural area. And this points out that it's, just the opposite of what we had intended is happening. And I know that John McBride talks to me periodically about the TDR program, trying to improve it and try to make it so the density is put in the urban areas instead of in the rural areas. But
and one note to make, because what's misleading there is that this is where approvals have been granted. And you have to note elsewhere, I try and be clear that a lot of TDRs are being landed in the urban growth boundary for larger homes on Red Mountain, those types of things. They don't need approval to do that. The code has authorized the use of TDRs on properties within the UGB. So those aren't showing up in this table.
Oh, okay.
I do try and call that out elsewhere in the report, where I think the number was like 68 TDRs have landed in the urban growth boundary for additional floor area for properties that did not require approval. So, that was one of the things in the in the code to incentivize the use in the urban growth boundary, was to take away. You don't have to ask for the permission to use them. You just go through your site plan review to show how they will be used. But this table, this isn't captured in this Exhibit D.
So it would be interesting to have, maybe we could probably extract that information out of here.
When she gets her new system, we'll ask her.
Well, I can see on the Exhibit C, it kind of points that out, compares the urban growth boundary with the other areas. But I see your point, Suzanne. Mm-hmm. And I did notice in the whole report that the TDR program appears to be really healthy, that there are lots of properties in the urban growth boundary that could land a TDR at this point, and it gives gives lots of possibilities for TDRs to be sold.
I mean,
if we didn't have that, then there'd be really a limited amount of possibilities for actually putting them in rural areas.
And just looking at 2017 under the table, that's the receiver site table that shows you all of those approved receiver sites. I do capture there when I put a property that says no NA, which means that approval wasn't required, but I capture that a TDR was extinguished there. I mean, just in the past year, 5 properties have gone through the hearing officer for special review approval to use TDRs, and then 5 have been in the urban growth boundary that didn't require that approval in order to extinguish. So anyway, so we are seeing both still, but there is a significant number that's going to those UGB properties.
George, can I?
Yeah, Patty.
I'm going to comment on that, because when initially the hope was we'd be able to work with the city of Aspen and try and come up with a way that they could land TDRs literally within the city of Aspen, so it wouldn't just be an unincorporated Pitkin County that's in the outlier of the urban growth boundary. But that we were never able to quite get where we wanted to go on that. So I think it's great that we're being able to land them in some areas in the urban growth boundary in unincorporated Pitkin County. That's good to see, but we would have been able to land more if we could have figured out a way to do it within the city, but we weren't able to do that. So good stuff.
I just have a question on the liquid nature of a TDR. Can a TDR be bought and sold by anyone, to anyone, or donated, or it's really it's like a security at this point.
Correct, all of the above. And it doesn't involve us other than that they're required by the code to notify us when the TDR has changed hands. So then we can track, when somebody does come in to extinguish it with a building permit, we verify that they're the true, the legitimate owner of that TDR. So either there have been deeds recorded or documentation along the way that shows how the TDR has been transferred.
Just wondering along maybe in our future discussions about extinguishing TDRs in different novel ways. And I'm not sure where that would go, but
That's
probably
part
come
of
up.
it. Yeah, we've talked about that being part of the discussion. It's a good point, Greg. All right.
This is listed under public hearings, but it's not really a public
No,
hearing. is
no,
it?
it's just informational, really.
Yeah, just
Oh,
information.
actually, no, I'm sorry. It is under the code or under the original ordinance that created the program. It is required that you have an annual public hearing to discuss, but there is no decision to be made. It's just information provided to you. So it is technically it is a public hearing.
Oh, so anybody
does
wishing
Ryan
to
wanna
comment on
comment on
this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Okay, thanks, Suzanne.
Thanks, Suzanne.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And we don't have to approve?
They don't have to
No,
do no
it's
action.
just an
We
FYI.
have to thank Suzanne for all her hard work.
Thank you,
It'll be so
Suzanne,
much easier.
for all the hard work.
Okay, let's see, open discussion, John, do we have anything?
Yeah, just one item for you. Rachel had brought up yesterday the issue of net neutrality and whether the county was going to weigh in. That weigh-in has to happen by Friday, in keeping with the theme of having to be nimble and quick on these issues. We have been looking, we thought that CCAT might take a position on net neutrality that we could piggyback on as a member. Does not appear that that's going to happen, and so wanted to have a quick conversation about whether the board, one, would like staff to prepare a letter and then authorize us to send it in for comments on Friday. We obviously won't have time to get back in front of the board. I do believe that at least the past policy discussions of this board would be more in line with a letter of support for net neutrality rather than consideration of removing net neutrality.
I did talk with Kara about it the other day, because it was a big thing when I was out in California hearing about all of it. And it's evolving, it's morphing. But I think you're right, but I think that there might be some concerns even in our support that Kara and I kind of briefly talked about and Rachel brought up. So I think we should do a letter of support, and we might want to put in there some issues that we see, because we don't really know how it's going to pan out at the end of the day,
Correct.
or if it'll even go anywhere.
Yeah, and I know Kara's able to provide some specific concerns that we think are consistent with at least past board discussion,
Yeah.
particularly with our broadband project. And so we would rely on that. And then George, probably, if you're available, or Patty, if you're available to just review and sign the
I'll be
letter.
down in the office tomorrow afternoon.
Okay, so,
Perfect.
okay.
Yeah.
We'll draft something if that's the board's direction.
I support that. And I'd be interested in knowing what implications regarding our own broadband network have come up around that. So I don't know enough about it, but I'm totally in support of pushing to maintain net neutrality.
Okay.
All right, good. Yeah, so if Karen get that done in the morning, I'll be down, I'm meeting with John at 1:30, so anytime mid-afternoon,
Okay.
I'll be down there.
And that's all I had for you.
Okay, Steve?
I had gotten an email from CCI, and I'm not finding it immediately, but it had to do with proxy, designating proxy, and it's a form we have to fill out
We do it.
for CCI meetings.
And so we do that each year with the resolution. And so, is there a legislative meeting coming up?
It's not till
Yeah.
January 20 or 16th. I can't remember which week it is there.
So I have already been designated as the proxy in the absence of a board member for all areas with exception of human services, which Nan is the proxy. In the coming year, we'll probably need to add Karen into that mix for public health related items. And so we'll need to redo our resolution and resubmit that form going forward. So we'll be talking to the board about the chair and vice chair appointments, and then typically at our first regular meeting in January we'll do the.
You maybe have this email, but I'll find it and I'll send it to you to make sure you have it, because it has an attachment with the form that we need to fill out.
Yep. Got it.
Okay, anybody else have anything for open discussion?
Nope. I'll make a motion to adjourn if you'd like. So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye. Thanks, George.
Nice grassroots, and thanks for your
Yes,
work
thank
here.
you.
We're
We'll
going to
keep
miss you. You did a good job. Come back.